Hello everyone, welcome back to the archive. I am your instructor, the Dream Keeper, and today we will be talking about the lore and characters of Steve and Eli, the esteemed members of the Creeplsayerz. Before we get into that, let me just congratulate you all for getting this channel to 100 subscribers. Man, I never thought we'd ever get to this point. Or if we did, it'd be a lot further in the future. But from me to you, thank you. And let's set another goal. If we could get this channel to 200 subscribers. Yeah, I know that's a big ask, but if we can get this to 100, it shouldn't be too hard to get it to 200. To get your mum, dad, friends, cats and dogs to subscribe. And now, let's get into it. Steve and Eli both appear in the first episode of the series in Trollhunters, acting in the stereotypical way a bully and nerd acts in these type of shows. Throughout the show, they mainly act as the comic relief characters, always in the background and never really contributing much to the overall story. Until one night, Steve hears a sound coming from his garage. Thinking it's only a raccoon, he goes in. Looking around, he continues to hear rustling throughout the place, and begins to notice that this creature isn't what he thinks. Suddenly, a goblin comes out of the dark and attacks him, and after a short scuffle, he traps it. Not knowing what it is or where it came from, he thinks, deciding to go to the only person he knows of who would have the slightest chance at knowing what it was. Steve would meet Eli at school, and at first Eli thinks it's going to be the regular locker treatment for him. But to his surprise, Steve comes for help and describes something he had only caught a glimpse of, and asks him to meet him at his house tonight. Later, Steve comes to his house and reveals what he caught the other night. Eli isn't surprised though. If anything, he knows exactly what this is. Steve is in an utter state of shock, asking Eli, what does he know of this creature? Eli warns him though, that he may not believe everything that he knows. And regardless, Steve asks anyway. Eli would begin to explain to Steve about all the weird things that had been happening in Arcadia. How it was a hotspot for monsters, magic, and aliens. And that he had been observing much of what was happening, even catching a glimpse of this firsthand. Slowly compiling evidence to suggest what exactly might be in their cozy town of Arcadia. Steve is dumbfounded, unable to understand the depth of all this, questioning Eli if he was losing his mind, until the goblin, using a toy, communicated who was really behind all of this.
There could be other gyms.
L is for lake.
Jim Lake? Jim Lake's behind all this?
Convinced that his rival was behind this, he and Eli traveled towards Jim's house to put a stop to his dastardly plans. Once arriving though, they found his house infested with massive monsters. beginning to panic over how they will ever defeat Jim with creatures like that on his side. Adding on to this, they overhear that an invasion will be happening tonight at the museum. Eli starts freaking out and suggests that they just leave this to the authorities to figure out. Steve, however, disagrees, thinking that they, and they alone, are the only ones who can stop this invasion on time. They don black bike helmets and break out bats, throwing knives and other equipment in order to deal with Jim, as well as a concoction to end the tyranny of Jim Lake Jr. The two arrive at the museum, splitting up in order to cover more ground and find Jim and splash the concoction onto him. After searching for a while, Eli would come across a strange looking fellow, and after taking a closer look, sees a creeper stare back at him and escape into the crowd. Steve, on the other hand, would find Jim and splash their concoction onto him, only to find that nothing happened. In shame, Steve would go to the bathroom and get cornered by Jim. And as Jim kicks down each door, the creeper attacks. Steve witnesses Jim fight against this creature and sees that he was possibly wrong about him. Coming out of the bathroom, he realizes the mistake the two have made and goes to stop Eli from making a mistake. He explains to Eli the terrible misconception of their ideal and that the two were way out of their league to deal with something like this. Suddenly, the creature would come out of nowhere and spook the two. Believing that this was the end, Steve remembered the fight earlier in the bathroom and the creature's weakness to flour. He and Eli sacrificed their school assignment to kill the beast. The two would return home and find that they had become great friends, vowing to hide and wait until Jim needed them most. Now I'm going to speed through this part and go more into detail later, as these scenes pertain more to their characters rather than actions. From this moment on, the two would help the trolls escape Troll Market, assist Toby and Jim cure the teachers, and at their school take part in the final battle of the bands. Next, the two would take a more central role during the events of Three Below, which starts around the third season of Troll Hunters. Eli has grown suspicious of Asher and Krell, and continually tries to figure out their secret. At the same time, Steve begins to build a crush on Asher, which eventually leads to him finding out about their secret. Later, during the end of the Battle of the Bands, the two would meet Asher and Krell again, where Steve and Asher would share their first kiss. Eli would then go off on his own to find out what is going on with Asher and Krell and discover their secret for himself. 2 weeks after, Eli would call Toby to his house to ask him for help in capturing the alien invaders. After Steve stopped answering his phone. During that same night, they would catch Steve with Asher and Krell and attempt to save him from them. Steve would explain though that he already knew about them and had promised to keep their real forms a secret. Before more of an explanation could come, an alien bounty hunter would attack and drive them off. Steve, Eli, and Toby would be brought to Mother for the first time and discover who it was that attacked them. Suddenly, Eli gets a notification that one of his traps went off. So the group suits up and goes down to fight this hunter. Instead of finding their man, they find Aja and Krell's protector, Zaja. They try to get her out of the trap, and at that moment, the hunter's hammer comes flying in and engages in battle with Aja and Krell. This proves wasted as his armor is almost impervious, so Eli and Steve set the trap again and capture him. This would also not work, as the bounty hunter would break loose and come very close to ending Aja's life, until Toby would remember the weakness of the hunter and defeat him. But before it died, he revealed the location of one of Aja and Krell's allies, and they would help set the stage for them to sneak off to the moon and get him back. Over the course of the season, the two Creepslayers would help the team escape and fight multiple enemies, and be a core part in ending Morondo's invasion of Arcadia. 3 Below would end, with Eli going off to Acaridia as the ambassador of Earth, with Steve remaining behind to protect Arcadia. The season ends with Toby, Og, and Steve meeting a talking cat who tells them that the world is ending again. Coming to Wizards, Steve, Toby, and Og would meet Merlin and Duxie and escort them to Merlin's base. Steve would go with them to Camelot in order to prepare for another invasion of Arcadia from a new, more powerful enemy. Just on cue, a mysterious enemy attacks them and tries to board them. Steve would be part of the defense to stave off this invasion and get the heart of Avalon working. But one blast from the enemy base would knock them off balance and hit Steve, Claire, Duxie, and Jim into the past. Here, Steve would meet the knight Lancelot, who took him under his wing, training him in proper combat, showing this off when an assassin, helping to fight it off and help lead to the creature's end. Steve would then help train the citizens of Dwoza in combat and fight in the Battle of Killer Head. Fighting alongside the Knights of Camelot, they would drive back the horde of Gum-Gums, coming face to face with Boulard the Butcher, who was far beyond Steve's pay grade. Lancelot would then step in and fight Boulard, but was also outmatched and killed by the Gum-Gum. Steve would run away, finding the Lady of the Lake to deliver vengeance for Lancelot. And at the end of the battle, Steve would vow to Lancelot to rebuild the Knights of the Round Table and carry on Lancelot's name. Steve would travel back to the present and immediately face off against the Green Knight. Steve would then play a minor role through the rest of the season, remaining in the background as a stationary character. Finally, he and Eli would reunite in the Rise of the Titans movie, where Eli had gotten his growth spurt, and Steve would get pregnant with Azur's children. Yeah, the writers didn't have any clue what to do with him, and it is universally agreed upon that this was a bad decision. And that's it for the entire lore on what Steve and Eli did across all of Tales of Arcadia. The abridged version, anyway. Now that we have their main lore out of the way, we will talk of their qualities as people. Steve is by far the more interesting of the two, going through a more substantial arc than Eli. Steve starts as the typical bully character, someone who gives tension to the characters at school and shows off his terrible personality multiple times. This would change in the episode aptly named Creeplsayerz, where we begin to unravel his reasoning for why he is the way he is. As a young kid, his father left him and his mother, and so he grew up without a proper father to help discipline and steady his path. And we see the coach character, Coach Lawrence, have a relationship with Steve as a new father figure. Yet due to his previous experiences, he denies his help. But after discovering the goblin, going to Eli and forming the Creeplsayerz, we see that under all that hard layer, he is a good person, bantering with Eli and protecting him. His development continues in the episode Bad Coffee, where he has to face Coach Lawrence and attempt to help him after he drank Gum Gum Ashes. A story for another time. Earlier, when Coach Lawrence drank it, he lost his mind at the smallest thing. And when Steve tried to defend some of the people he was shouting at, Coach Lawrence gives him a stern warning. And we see that this really does affect him emotionally. So when it comes to helping Coach Lawrence later, he lets his guard down, completely connecting with the coach, telling him how much of a positive influence on his life he has been, and how he has truly become someone he cares about. Then in 3 Below, we continue to see the more caring and accepting side of Steve, spurred on by his meeting of Azur, finding someone that he begins to get a crush on, and finding out about her secret. But instead of freaking out, he actually admires how beautiful she is in her true form. This would soon become a budding relationship, as they officially kiss during the Battle of the Bands. This wasn't the only relationship that grew, as we see the development between him and Eli's friendship grow as well. From the routine bully versus nerd to the lone defenders of Arcadia, who laugh, care, and look out for one another. Steve's appreciation for others also grows. As we see in Wizards, he comforts Toby when Jim comes back to life. Toby, of all people, willingly went to Steve. If that doesn't show development, I don't know what will. Going back to Azur and his relationship with her, we see the actual struggles a teenage relationship goes through and how they overcome it, showing off how much they love and cherish each other multiple times, to the point Azur was alright with giving up her life if it was to save Arcadia. And it gives me a smile to know that Steve was a big part of that reason. Eli went through a more simple yet heartwarming development. For most of the series, he was a weird kid, someone who people thought was crazy due to his wild theories and tall tales about monsters in Arcadia. But when he finally found someone who believed him, who looked out for him, he showed off his more loyal characteristics. And even though he saw them as monsters, he still decided to help them in the end. Then, when war came, he fought alongside the others to save his town and the monsters he once feared. Then, when he discovered that aliens inhabited Arcadia, he responded as well as many of us would take it. But after proper introductions, he found them to be new friends. Like when invasion threatened to descend upon his world, he was the only one left standing between the end and victory. And despite the odds, he was able to postpone the end and buy them a little more time to prepare for his second wave, which would be discovered partly by him, and again he would fight to protect the people, finding fame through those he had saved, even making the decision to go off-world and discover a life away from Arcadia. The one who was respected the least became a hero, not only on his own home, but all the universe. Together, these two are one of my favorite aspects of this show. For people who have been there since the beginning, it is wild to see how far they have come. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and may the glory of Merlin be with you always.